Welcome to the Victims and Villains podcast. This is the show where we talk nerd, we talk hope, and we speak nothing else.
I'm your co-host, Alan Cram.
I'm your other co-host, Captain Nostalgia, and this episode is 340, where we are getting golden because we're talking about Goldfinger, the 1964 James Bond movie.
He's gunning for trouble. The world's wiliest, toughest gentleman agent with a license to kill. 007. It spells Bond. He's the idol of every woman. Sean Connery in Iain-Flemming's Goldfinger.
I will be completely honest with people. I am a complete novice when it comes to James Bond movies. I have no relationship whatsoever.
I'm about the same. I've only seen one of them in theaters, but I've been wanting to sit down and watch them all before this new one comes out, and I think this was a good place to start. So I think I'm on the right path now to get this all done before No Time to Die.
So I saw the trailer to No Time to Die, and I was like, all right, I finally need to invest into this franchise. Because the trailer for it looked amazing. It just looks like such a epically awesome movie, and then having Rami Malek as your villain. And he recently did an article with GQ where he talked about like how getting in the mindset of that character, like he had actually go to therapy afterwards, because he got like really dark, and so like that like really intrigues me and really makes me want to invest in these a bit more. And so this year I have attempted to start going through them, and I have made them through almost all of the Sean Connery movies. So I have like 20 left to go before No Time to Die.
Yeah, I mean, I have to backtrack a little bit to get the two we missed before this one, but I'm starting at the beginning too, so I'm right there with you.
So I actually had a friend of mine that swears by the Connery Bond. And Connery, if I remember correctly, he was the first one. He has done Dr. No, From Russia with Love, this movie we're talking about here. I believe Thunderball is also him. And then I believe You Only Die Twice.
And then there's a weird one, which is Never Say Never Again, which is when Sean Connery came back to the Bond franchise, and it doesn't count as a Bond film to some people, but it is a Bond film because it wasn't made by the same studio.
Yeah. And I think Diamonds Are Forever was his last one. Yeah, the Bond franchise kind of got really weird there for a while. Moonraker, I think, is kind of the weirder ones that have kind of existed, but I feel like the first two entries into this, it's a hot take right now. They don't live up to this. I feel like this is kind of the peak of Connery's Bond. And obviously I feel like when you think of Sean Connery, you think of James Bond, or in our case, since we grew up in the 90s, Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. Dale Herman's impression. That's not what your mother said last night, Trebek.
Yeah. So I never like really grew up with Sean Connery. I knew him from The Rock and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And when there was a gap in our schedule originally before he had died, and when he had died, I was contemplating on what to do, and I was like, kind of want to do League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but I feel like that's such a piss poor monument to him because of how terrible that movie has aged.
And that's the one that got him out of acting. Like that's the one that's he hung it up after that because he had such a bad experience on that film.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The director quit filmmaking after that, and then Sean Connery had such a bad experience he didn't want to do anything again. So he spent the last 20 years retired pretty much.
Like, so I knew that he had like given up acting, but I did not know it was because of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was made in like 2003, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and since then he's been retired from acting. They tried to get him out for a few things, which we'll talk about later. But
So what is your kind of like relationship growing up with Sean Connery?
I mean, I knew of him from the SNL stuff, and the Simpsons would do like the Sean Connery accent. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing people do Sean Connery accents. But I mostly knew him from the commercials for The Rock, which was a movie I wasn't allowed to watch. But then eventually Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Oh yeah.
Junior. And so like that's probably the movie that stands out to me the most for him. When I think Sean Connery, I think Dr. Henry Jones running around with Indy, running away from Nazis, chasing away all the seagulls on the beach. I remembered my Charlemagne.
And you guys can actually hear us do a film commentary over on our Patreon for The Last Crusade and the first two Indiana Jones movies as well. And this month we'll be doing part 4, but just shameless self-plug there for a quick second.
Yeah. And if we're doing shameless self-plugs, I'll throw mine out there. In full discretion of this episode, I've spent the last 24 hours watching nothing but Sean Connery movies for this podcast. And for over my podcast, we're doing a Sean Connery triple feature where we talk about The Rock, Hunt for Red October, and what was the other one? Oh, The Untouchables.
I feel like Sean Connery has a filmography that has a distinct palette when you're talking about it in film, where for us kind of growing up in the 90s, you know, he never really made movies that I feel like would appeal to us back then. And so you didn't really kind of get into him until you were of, I guess, like older age. And because like Sean Connery never really crossed my path as a cinephile till maybe like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where he doesn't really have any kids movies on here. On it, just looking at his IMDb, Time Bandits maybe, depending on the household you lived in, maybe Highlander. But yeah, he didn't really do many things for kids, so it's one of those things where it's mostly stuff oriented for adults. But even that in that stuff, it runs the gambit. It's not the same genre. It's not just all spy thrillers. It's spy thrillers and action and kind of comedies, and no matter what, he has the same accent. So,
and I feel like one of the reasons that I love him so much as Bond is because from what I've been told by other Bond enthusiasts is that the quippy one-liners that he has here in Goldfinger kind of just end up eventually leaving the franchise after Connery does. Like there's one where he blows a guy up and he's like, shocking. Positively shocking. And I love that about like just his delivery is that he's such a dad in every sense of the word when it comes to his sarcasm and his sense of humor.
Yeah, it almost reminded me of the Austin Powers movies, which make fun of the Bond franchise. Like I feel like even if before Goldmember, you look back at International Man of Mystery and Spy Who Shagged Me, like they're pulling jokes from the Sean Connery Bonds and just taking them up to 11.
I will say though that this is the only Bond I've seen twice now, and this movie makes me appreciate Goldmember a little bit more every time I watch it.
I like gold. Yeah.
Honestly, so without getting into the spoilers, the main villain in this movie has a infinity love for gold, and to where he actually has an evil villain monologue. He says, "This is gold, Mr. Bond. All my life, I have been in love with its color, its brilliance, and its divine heaviness." And like just kind of simplifying that down to "I like gold" was what I kept wanting Goldfinger to do the entire time he was on screen, every time talking about gold.
Yeah.
Mike Myers ruined our child, ruined us.
For James Bond, kind of. I feel like that's kind of the reason why I haven't really gotten into this franchise up until now. Like it's campy, but not like on purpose.
I think that also too is kind of almost a product of its time. When you go back and you watch either like spy films or like, I won't necessarily say like thrillers, but like certain genres around this time, they just kind of ooze that camp.
Yeah.
And no matter how much you age it, you just can't get away from it.
No, that's fair.
But let's talk about Goldfinger. This was a first for you. So what were your general thoughts coming out of this?
So James Bond gets parodied a lot outside of even Austin Powers, like The Simpsons, anything kid related. Like you get the evil, like the stereotype of the villain giving the monologue and the hero being tied up and a laser beam coming at him. All that comes from this movie. So it's really nice to go back to the origins of those archetypes and those story beats that you see over and over and over again. It was nice to just go back and see that all from the beginning and where that all came from. I liked Connery's sense of humor that he brought to James Bond that you don't really see anymore, and Daniel Craig as much. And I love the score, just those horns playing. I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad that you brought up the soundtrack, the score, and I knew that you would. So John Barry is the composer on this one, and for those of you guys that have never actually listened to Alan's podcast, you have to watch this podcast. He's the music guy, the soundtrack, the scores, like that's his bread and butter over on there. And so I was really excited to kind of get to talk about, because one of the things that I think, James Bond has kind of gotten really iconic for is that opening shot where it's just the gun magazine or whatever. I don't know, guns. It's like,
I think it's the barrel.
Okay. So you're
looking down the barrel.
You're looking down the barrel and you just kind of see him, and it's that it's very just iconic by this point. And I'm so glad that you brought up a lot of the iconic statures of this particular movie, the origin of it. And one in particular, there's a Simpsons episode where Homer accepts a job at another nuclear power plant, and I can't exactly remember who, like the guy that he ends up working for, but he ends up getting stuck in like this like very similar trapment that Goldfinger has with Bonds, and it's like he's like just slowly starting at the bottom of this table with this laser and just going slowly up to his crotch. So it's parried a lot.
In addition to being the soundtrack guy over on You Have to Watch This Podcast, I'm also the Simpsons guy. The character you're talking about is Hank Scorpio.
That's who it was.
From the episode You Only Move Twice, which is one of my all-time favorites. And I will forever be disappointed that they did not bring him back as the villain in the Simpsons movie like they wanted to. Yeah, like that's like one of the best James Bond parodies, because you not only get the parody of the villain, you also get the parody of the henchman, which is pretty much what Homer becomes, but he's blissfully unaware like Homer is to everything going on around him. Now streaming on Disney Plus.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored by Disney Plus in any way, shape, or form.
I was just throwing that out there so people can watch it. Or hit me up. I'll lend you the DVD.
I know. So for me, like this is my favorite Bond movie that I have seen thus far. I really like the villain. I feel like the plot is very like cut and dry with this one, whereas some of the other Bonds I've seen kind of like the motive starts out here, and then like other spy thrillers, it kind of like evolves into this like overtly complex secret thing. And early Bond movies, there's an underlining villain that is kind of at work that I really enjoy from what I've seen. I think that it's very creative to kind of have all of these villains around Bond revolve around here, but this film takes a break from that. It takes a break from spirals to kind of get us into just an original villain. And one of the things that I learned recently from Jonathan Davidson, I think is his last name. But he was actually on our Bill and Ted episode. He loves this movie and said that the villain, the actor that played Goldfinger, actually could not speak very fluent English. So what they did is they actually dubbed over his lines for this movie. That's why if you watch it and like the audio doesn't quite sync up, that is the reason.
That makes sense. So before we move on to spoilers, I have one fun tidbit about this, about the soundtrack, about the theme. So I know the theme song from a different soundtrack, and that is a little show called Frasier. There's an episode of Frasier where Frasier Crane, his brother, and his dad are all at a nightclub, and his dad gets the piano player to play the Goldfinger theme because they all know it. So they're all gathered around the piano in this club singing Goldfinger, and it's a good scene, but for some reason it's on the Frasier soundtrack. So I have that on my phone, on my iPod for some reason.
Shirley Bassey, sorry. Goldfinger. Yeah, I love that song. It has been stuck in my head since I watched this movie. No matter how much music I've tried to listen to, that Goldfinger, it stays there.
For me, it's just going to be the wah, wah, wah.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to jump into spoilers right after these brief messages.
Wah, wah, wah.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now, and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victimsandvillains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victimsandvillains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. Welcome back to Victims and Villains. We are heading into spoiler territory for the 1964 classic Goldfinger. So if you guys haven't seen it yet, this is
You've had some time.
Yeah, this is your official spoiler warning. But even if they haven't seen it, like, this was a first watch for you.
It was.
So I just want to preface that for all the listeners out there. This movie made some bazoonga dollars at the box office. It had a budget of $3 million, and do you want to guess what the return on it was?
I'm gonna guess 10 million.
125 million. Yeah, this currently holds a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is crazy to think about. And well, let's go ahead and kind of get into this area. I think James Bond most is known, obviously, for being a charming gentleman, but I think mostly when you think of these movies and the spies, let's talk about the fight choreography right off the bat. How do you feel that this film? How do you feel about this movie in terms of like fight choreography and stuff like that?
It's not John Wick.
No,
It's definitely very clunky, but even for the 60s, it's not Batman the TV show. It's very, yeah, the Bat Tootsie. For everyone at home, Josh was just doing the Bat Tootsie. And if you don't know what that is, go to YouTube and look it up. Another great Simpsons reference. It's very fisticuffs, I think is the best way to put it. Like, just very broad motions, kind of wide shot. So you see, it's not a lot of close-ups and cutaways like you'd get in a Marvel movie nowadays. It's very planned out, which I enjoyed.
That's one of the things I love about going back and watching some of these older films that are in the action genre or spy or thriller genre, is that they're very meticulous in the way that they're shooting things. That said, one of the fights that I feel like bothered me more than anything else was just because of how wooden it was, but also kind of like contradictory, was the fight in the end between Bond and Oddjob, where they're in the gold vault and like Bond is just like throwing these things at him and he's just like laughing about it. It kind of almost seems like he's like superhuman. I don't know if you got that, but like the whole entire fight sequence around those two just feels so contrived and like choked.
It's weird because he does have that like supernatural element to him where he can throw that hat perfectly. Like, and it does seem like he is invincible, but I think the best thing about that fight is the end where Bond tricks him to picking up the hat in between the metal bars and then electrocuting him. Like, that's the best part of that fight. And I don't think you get the payoff of that without the fight leading up to that. Like, I don't think you get as good of a payoff if you don't have that fight beforehand.
So, and it feels like the action sequences are almost bookended by the antagonist of the fight kind of ending in that way, because in the very beginning, Bond is with a lady, as one does, which we'll talk about later. We will definitely be talking about that later. But one of the things that, the opening sequence, like he sees off of an iris of the girl that he's kissing, someone's coming to attack him, and then he the attacker trips and ends up in a bathtub, and Bond throws in an air, like a fan or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that. So like the film feels like very bookended in those ways.
They're very shocking endings.
Positively shocking. I don't know why mine sounds like Bane.
Because Bane is kind of a Sean Connery. Like it's like Sean Connery through a cup. That's not what your mother said last night. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of.
It's a little bit of a higher pitched Sean Connery if you had like a cup in front of your face.
Yeah. That's accurate though.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I like about this film a little bit more is, for me as a film goer, and I don't know if this is you as well, I enjoy villains that aren't overtly violent, but are more of the psychological. And I feel like they make for a better, compelling story and also a better antagonist in the end.
Yeah, I like the fact that I keep wanting to say Goldfinger. Goldfinger is just in it for the financial gains. It's not, I'm going to kill all of these people for just to kill them. It's, I have a goal. Like, he's going to kill a bunch of people, but he's not in it for that. He's in it for the financial gains that he'll get out of everything. It's not like he doesn't. It makes a better villain when he doesn't care about the people that he's blowing up. Like, they're just an afterthought to him, and I think that makes it more sinister and more interesting to me. So it gives you more to cheer on for your hero going into a film like this.
Well, his operation too is very much a artistic. I feel like that's not the right word to say, but he's very calculated in here. He has a thing that he talks about, saying, smuggling is an art form here. He's very sincere. He's very calculated in everything that he does. And I feel like there's a lot of thought that goes into it. Like, he even talks that when he's revealing his grand plan for Operation Grand Slam, where he is basically going to be just poisoning everyone aerially and going to be like robbing the bank vaults in Fort Knox, which is the country's largest bank. At least it was in 1964.
I mean, it's still where the Federal Reserve keeps their gold.
Okay, so yes, I would imagine so. But he talks about like how gold can be like melted down, be virtually undetected. But he, at the same time, he's like this like legitimate businessman. He's kind of almost like the Lex Luthor of the Bond universe, which is something that I think makes for an interesting character dynamic, because he's thought of just about everything. Even when you bring in Bond to go to Kentucky, he has everything like already well thought out of like where he's going to stay, like the security that he's going to be placing around Bond and just stuff like this. Like, he's come to learn to know his villain, or his enemy, so to say. And he's just very smart in that way. And that's what makes him such a compelling villain for someone like James Bond. Yeah.
So when he talked about melting down the gold, I thought that was going to be his end scheme for Fort Knox. Like, he's going to melt down all the gold and pump it out. I'm like, why am I thinking that he's just going to, like, why do I think that's his plan? And then I remembered there was an episode of the Super Mario Brothers Super Show from the 80s that I had on VHS that was Mario as Robin Hood. And he would melt down all of Koopa's gold, and he got it all to a well for everyone to just pump out gold coins. So I don't know why I thought the James Bond plot just was stolen for this Mario cartoon from the 80s, but I did, and I wanted you to know that.
Well, now it's out there for the entire world to hear.
Yes, I wanted everyone to know.
But I think that as though it's like he's a fascinating villain to kind of think. Just to really consider as well. Him and Oddjob both, I think, are compelling characters. Oddjob doesn't say anything throughout this entire movie. He definitely feels like that bumbling sidekick a little bit. But that hat, though, that hat trick with the razor blade on the inside is freaking awesome.
Again, it just reminded me of Austin Powers. Who throws his shoe? Honestly. Like, it's... It is crazy to see him like with such accuracy. Do they show the razor blade in the hat or not? They do. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is he takes off the hat, and I don't remember if he flips it over at that moment or if he just tosses it, but he tosses it and it actually takes off the head of a statue.
Yeah.
And Bond is just kind of like dumbfounded by like what just happened, and then he flips over the hat.
I think I missed that. No, the hat's a really cool gimmick, and that is one of those things that you see from. I think that's one of the things that you see going on throughout the other Bond films. Is you get Jaws with the metal teeth later on, and it becomes a gimmick for each movie to have a villain who has that kind of thing. For better or worse.
I mean, also too, like that's kind of ingrained into the Bond franchise at this point. Is how can we make the gadgets bigger and better from the last one? And so this film is important to the franchise because this is the debut of the Astro Martin, where he is normally had a Bentley in the previous two films. He makes a comment about it, but this Astro Martin is pretty amazing when it comes down to it. It comes equipped with guns, smoke screen, an oil slick. If you press a red button under the shifter, you can eject the top and the side of the passenger, and to kind of get to safety. And I don't know, and then it has like a revolving license plate too, depending on what country you're on. Their attention to detail for these movies are so awesome.
He still drives the Aston Martin now, right?
Yeah, I do believe so. I believe now because the first time I watched this, like I didn't pick up on that detail, but because I know that like when you talk about Astro Martin, like it is synonymous with James Bond by this point. Like he's been with that car for so long that you just think it's hard to see him drive anything else. I would love Connery to like have like come back in like maybe like a Halloween style fashion where he's like pushing like 70. It's like an alternative timeline and he's just driving a minivan now.
So I hinted at this earlier. They did try to get him back into the franchise.
They did. You did talk about that.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that though?
Yeah. Back when Skyfall was in production, there was the idea of having him be at. Have you seen Skyfall?
No.
Okay. So there's a part in Skyfall where, slight spoilers for Skyfall, the idea would have been that he would have been playing a retired James Bond. So the James Bond name is a title passed along to different people. So there would have been a point in the film where Daniel Craig's James Bond would have met Sean Connery's James Bond, who's now older and retired. And it didn't get far into the process. They were all ended up being played by Albert Finney, who is also a great actor. And they didn't go the retired James Bond route, but it would have been really cool to see that and just have like the idea that the Bond name is a title passed along with the 007 moniker.
So this is actually something that they've explored a little bit in there. I don't think that they've ever actually like widened it up, so to say.
It would have kind of confirmed the fan theory.
Yeah. So the idea too was that, we never really see anyone else outside of 007. Like they talk about 008 in this movie, but the idea of that kind of multiverse is, I feel like, what they're trying to go with as far as No Time to Die moving forward, because you broaden yourself up to a cornucopia of other options to where you're not just, tied down to this typically white male character. I feel like we've kind of reached this point in entertainment now to where we want to see different cultural stories, different cultural actors, different perspectives, because that is how you keep your perspective fresh. And that's kind of yourself. I mean, you talked about the MCU earlier. You look at how long they went as far as just singular like white heroes, and then Black Panther comes along and it's something extraordinarily refreshing. One of the best things that they've ever put out. Same good, I would argue, goes for Guardians of the Galaxy, and then Miss Marvel at the same time, or sorry, Captain Marvel. Despite the controversy around that, but it's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But for No Time to Die, they're actually doing that with. It looks like the trailers are hinting at that they're actually going to be doing that with Lashana Rashida Lynch's character, who ironically enough played Maria in Captain Marvel.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go with the character from here on. I feel like their best bet would be to make the James Bond title able to move on to someone else. Like, James Bond isn't their birth name, it's a title, it's a fake identity so people can infiltrate easier. Like, it's just protection, or just it's just a job title. James Bond is like, you put that on your resume.
I mean, you really wouldn't be able to put that on your resume.
I mean,
like, what is this James Bond? Like, can you tell me a little bit about this?
I also like the fan theory that Sean Connery's character in The Rock is just James Bond.
I could see that. I'd be all about that if they ever confirm that.
Because he like breaks out of prison for like a day and ends up having a kid 9 months later. Which is kind of the what James Bond would do.
You talk about the influence that this particular movie has on pop culture, and we've jumped around this movie so much, but
yeah,
the title sequence alone with Goldfinger and the projected images up against the woman in gold and black, we still see that. I mean, granted, it is very, very limited into the capacity we see it, but all of the Mission Impossible movies have done sequences in that vein. So you're still seeing that. And like I said, like, I haven't been keeping up on modern day Bond movies. Not yet. We'll get there. But I feel like the Mission Impossible, like, when I was watching that sequence, I couldn't help but kind of see some of like Mission Impossible like 4, 5, and 6, and kind of how they handled their title sequences very early in their movie.
Yeah, you also kind of see it in at least the projection aspect in the end of Avengers Endgame, with all of the actors thrown up on the screen. It's like projected. Yeah, I think James Bond was very trendsetting for style as well. Like, people took the idea of an opening title sequence like that and ran with it for movies and TV. Like we talked about the Batman TV show earlier. I don't think you have that opening without James Bond, because it's very formulaic. You get the style of the circles pouncing around the screen a little bit. It's very 60s, and I think it was very influential to other things in the 60s.
Yeah, because Bond kind of came out of this weird era in the 50s where like sci-fi had really hit its strive, and Iain Fleming, who is the creator behind this character, really set out to do something that kind of came against that sci-fi aspect of aliens and monsters and kaiju. Like, he wanted something that was just going to be fun and simple, and so we got James Bond. And James Bond started out as novels, and when they started to really pick up steam, MGM was like, we would like to buy the rights to do this character, and so we got Dr. No. And Dr. No, I want to say, was a Dr. No, when it came out in 1962, was a massive hit, being made for $1.1 million, turning around and making $59.5 million a year later with Russia From Russia with Love, made for $2 million, turned around and made $79 million. So, like, you know, the way that we're constantly seeing like horror movies being made in our own age today for like $3 to $5 million, but turning a profit of like $60 to $150 million. I mean, these movies cost like next to nothing to make, and they were just profiting them. And so, again, I feel like that was coming out of that age of needing something new that wasn't necessarily sci-fi. I mean, sci-fi by this time kind of was still there, but it was very much kind of like sliding into the cult scene that we know now.
Yeah. One thing we haven't really talked about in talking about all of the standard things that you find in the James Bond movie, whether it be the gadgets, the villains, is the character names. Because we're gonna have to talk about it. There's one that Josh told me he's going to make him giggle like a 13-year-old.
Pussy freaking galore.
Yeah. Because even Bond is like, wow. Okay, then.
Yeah, the first time I saw this movie, I actually had to rewind this to make sure that I heard that right. I was like, let's go back, because we're like, this is probably right around the time where Hugh Hefner is like getting the idea to do Playboy. So I think this Playboy is within his like first 10 years, but it's such an awkward name. And like, I did research after I watched this last night to try and find out like if this word is like, if pussy is actually a legitimate name, because, or if it like, you know what it is, like because in the 60s it doesn't have the derogatory terminology that it does nowadays.
Yeah.
But I literally couldn't find anything. The closest thing I found was an article from like BuzzFeed. It was like how the word pussy went from meaning pocket to being one of the most hated words in today's day and age. And I was just like, because Just Married named one of their characters Pussy as well.
So Playboy had been around for 11 years by this point.
Oh, okay. I knew it was in the 50s somewhere.
Yeah, 53. So my Google search history is all messed up now. So yeah, that's one that they really make fun of a lot in Austin Powers, like we talked about. I'm not going to say those names right now because they're all escaping me. But that's not even like Pussy Galore is one thing. I really like what they did with Goldfinger's name. And you don't see it unless you look at his name on paper. His name is Auric Goldfinger. But he spells his name Auric. Now, I don't remember much from science, but I remember that on the periodic table, gold is AU.
Wow.
So that his name even has gold in it, like on both ends. So and I think that's very clever.
Yeah,
it's a tip of the hat.
Because I feel like you're not really gonna notice that unless you are like into science or like know your periodic table. Because I don't think I've looked at a periodic table in like 15 years.
They showed his name at one point in the movie, and I was like, oh, that's clever. And I didn't put it together until we sat down to record and saw that was actually his name. I was like, okay, that's really clever. Good for them.
Yeah, for real. Tip of the hat to you guys. But sticking on Pussy Galore, I feel like that kind of opens it up for a larger issue that I have with Bond as a franchise, and specifically with this movie, is that the way that just women are treated so much as nothing more than really like sex objects. And again, like, I get it. Like, it's 60s, it's free love, like, whatever. But, watching it from a 2020 perspective, we get into this movie before we even meet Pussy Galore. And it's like, she gets introduced probably like the halfway point of this movie.
Yeah, maybe she's like not in it for much.
45, 50 minutes into this movie. And by that time, James has already been with 4 girls. And they just feel like throwaway characters. And for as much as I love this movie, and as much as like I love horror movies, another great example, like I understand that from a storytelling standpoint, when I watch something like a Friday the 13th, I'm not going to really get to like any of those characters except for the final girl, because that's the way that script has been written. That's the way that it has been formulated. And when you're watching the increase from Dr. No to Goldfinger, you're making movies for $1 million. You're getting a $60 million box office. Next one's $2 million. You're making almost $80 million. So next one you're going to do $3 million. Like, there's clearly a formula that's working, and you're not going to clearly change it. And that's one of the things that like I enjoy about Pussy Galore as a character, because there's a scene where her and Bond are in the plane together, and she says, you can turn off the charm, I'm immune. Like, right away, like, I just like her as a character. And then 30 minutes later, that immunity breaks and she becomes another Bond girl. And so I just feel like, how did you feel watching this as the treatment of women within this franchise?
I mean, it's about what I expected for 1960s James Bond. I was looking up, I just did some research here and pulled up the Bond girl Wikipedia page, and it kind of makes me, it's kind of weird looking at it, because for the film section of it, they have it split up in 4 different categories for the Bond girls. They have the sexual partners, they have the main sidekick, the femme fatale, and the sacrificial lamb. Which all 4 of the Goldfinger's the first one to have all 4. Dr. No and From Russia with Love don't have sacrificial lambs, but it's weird that you can split them up. Like, it's common, like the stories are beat for beat, that you can have this happen with so many different women throughout the franchise. And I think the series has gotten better with it over time. Because I think in the 60s, like, yes, it was free love and all of that, but it's not so much that anymore. So
well, I think with the Daniel Craig movies, you're able to kind of get into this more serialized aspect of the storytelling, which is what I've been told when you go through a lot of these other Bonds, whether you're talking about Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, and Sean Connery, and there's a couple, Roger Moore. They're not episodic, they're anthological. So you're basically having no connective tissue to what has gone before it. Like, this is just like another day, another adventure for Bond. And whereas the Daniel Craig ones, you definitely have a lot more of that. I wouldn't say connective tissue. Oh, no, there's like a more like universal, like Christopher Waltz has been the villain in like 2 or 3 movies. Spiral has definitely become more of a focal point, and it looks like, Bond is no longer like this like womanizer, but he's now has a quote unquote love of his life. It looks like that's at least how they're taking No Time to Die. But I feel like that is one of the reasons why it's harder to kind of go back, and the issue of women being depicted in earlier media is exactly that. It's hard to watch sometimes from a modern standpoint. Like, I don't know if you're into some of like more like Hollywood classics, but like my wife and I have been kind of on this kick where we'll go back and watch movies from like anywhere between like the mid 20s to like the early 50s, and the problems that I consistently have with them and and one of the ones that I have here recently, whether it was with Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca or The Invisible Man from the 1939, is just the depiction of women. Like, women are just like very one note, very hysterical, like, or they're in the kitchens. It's like we have to make these women as shallow as possible. And when you talk about the Bond girls and the just the way the four categories, like, it's very formulated, and it says, okay, a woman can't grow past this in this franchise, but why?
So the way it breaks it down is he's either going to have sex with you, you're going to help him, you're going to look dangerous, or you're going to die. Like, it is weird looking at it from 2020 eyes, but like Hollywood still has its issues, but it's come a long way since 1964 with all of this.
I know, and so, you know, but it's still hard to like watch them.
Yeah,
because I mean, again, it's just it's a product of its time in some ways, but in some like areas, it's like, okay, this is a fun movie, but in some ways, it's still very much a product of its time.
Yeah. The other thing I want to touch on the Bond girls is the first two in this film are sisters, and they're named Jill and Tilly. So
wait. You're back. You're. I think you're off. I think it's 3 and 4 in this one.
Oh well, I'm not counting the one from the opening.
You're not counting the one from the opening, but are you counting the one from the hotel?
Yeah,
that's not Jill. The one that he was like, go away, it's man business. Also, the way that we treat women.
Yeah, the masseuse. I'm not counting the masseuse either.
Okay.
But no, the two that are sisters are named Jill and Tilly, and I'm just thinking, why was your parents name you Jill and Till? Like, that's just the 30s were a weird time, man.
But I like it. I like the aspect of those Bond girls coming into that. Here you have Jill, who is an agent of Goldfinger, and she falls under the swooning, so to say, of James Bond. And then you have Tilly, who has no like tissue to Bond or to Goldfinger. She just wants to kill him, and like, I feel like I would have wanted more of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like it would have been more interesting to have Tilly continue on instead of bringing in Pussy Galore. Because it, like, the revenge aspect's it's more depth for a character like that. It's more details for a Bond girl instead of just fitting into the four archetypes.
Because she's already tied both to the hero and the villain without actually ever stepping on screen.
Yeah.
And she even says at one point where Bond's like, yeah, I knew your sister is Jill. And she's like, oh, no, you didn't. He's like, actually, I did. And then they kind of have this like cathartic healing moment almost. And I mean, but in the long run, like, outside of revenge, like, she's very like one note. Like, I don't even really remember what happened to her.
She gets hit with the hat.
Oh yeah, that's right. The hat's so boss.
So the hat takes off the head of a statue, but he throws it at a girl in the woods, and it just knocks her out and kills her.
The 60s were a wild and crazy time, man.
But not crazy enough that they could decapitate a woman on screen. So the other thing we need to talk about with the Bond girls is the gold paint.
Yeah, that gold paint has become iconic. you guys can't see this right now, but my background is James Bond with paint to my, like, what is this? My right? Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, it's on your right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's I mean, talk about a signature way to like leave a calling card.
That's one of those images that I've always seen, and I didn't know the whole time that character was dead until I watched the movie. So that led to me Googling, because they go into detail on how she died. It's like skin suffocation. That's why you always leave a patch at the bottom of the spine. So I looked it up, and I was like, yeah, that's not, like, it's very unlikely that you'll die from that.
I mean, you could also die from like paint poisoning too, because I mean, like if he ingested enough into her, like it's very.
And it depends on what kind of paint it is. Like the actor who played the Tin Man died of cancer from the paint that they used to make him the Tin Man.
Oh, did not know that.
Yeah, I'm just full of trivia for you, Josh.
Because I know that like there was an X-Files episode where a guy had died from like eating paint, and they, like, I don't know, but yeah, like the gold tints here too is like it's such an awesome introduction to Goldfinger, like kind of like after we meet him after at poker, and you never really see him kind of get that dark again, which kind of dampened my spirits a little bit, but at the same time, like, it rejuvenated at the same time, because like he didn't feel like that classic Bond archetype.
Yeah, they show it once and then that's it. And it would have been cool to see it one more time, maybe in a smaller way, but I don't know. Like, I feel like maybe he felt flat for me as a villain, because he leans into the gold thing for his scheme, but I kind of wanted some more gold. In the words of Goldmember, I like gold.
I mean, everything that he was about gold, and like his scheme at the end, like why he wants to basically break into Fort Knox. It's a bit more complex than I can lead on, but I mean, he's a very well calculated villain, and I feel like that's the reason why I like him so much, is just because of
he has
how
his
smart
gimmick.
He is.
He has his gimmick, but he doesn't lean into it too much, and I just wish that he leaned into it just a tad bit more for my liking. But
that's fair. And before we leave, we are going to do our mental health moment for this episode, and really what kind of brought this episode and this conversation between me and Alan on was the untimely. I guess I can't say untimely, because he was 90. Not to make light of his death, but he lived a good life. And talking about, of course, Sir Sean Connery, and if his family happens to hear this, our thoughts and prayers go out to you guys. Sean seemed like a genuine dude, and he's a great actor. I've never seen one Sean Connery episode or movie that I've never not liked.
Yeah, some things have come out about him in the last few days that don't look great in 2020 eyes, but he's from a different generation, different landscape than we live in right now. But he's such a immense talent, and it's such a loss for Hollywood. And he's a Hollywood icon. They don't make movie stars like him anymore. They sound like him when they're Tom Hardy as Bane, but they don't make them like Sean Connery anymore. Try as they might, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig, Timothy Dalton, they're not Sean Connery. They never will be. Sean Connery was James Bond for a whole generation, and still is to many people. He's such an iconic actor that it's a big loss to a lot of people. But 90 years is a long life, and even with that, in the year of 2020, it's still a huge loss. And I think it's hard to lose someone who's so sick, whether it's Sean Connery or A few years ago, we lost Carrie Fisher, different circumstances, but her mom, Debbie Reynolds, also a Hollywood legend up there in age. And it's hard to lose someone who's had such a long life and career, but they leave that behind for people for future generations to see.
Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here, we didn't grow up on these movies, and now coming in almost into our 30s and now going back and experiencing films like James Bond and Psycho and The Birds and stuff that were predominant around the time of these movies, where Connery was becoming a big name for these Bond movies. Like you said, like he was James Bond to an entire generation, and some people like still have it in their head that that James Bond basically lived and died with him. Once he hung up the keys to the Astro Martin and the gadgets, like that was it for them. Like they didn't want to see anymore. And some of the other Bonds haven't been super well received, and some have. But I think at the same time, like we look at other icons that we've lost this year, whether it be the super untimely death of Chadwick Boseman this past August, Kobe Bryant at the beginning of this year. Just to this has been a hard year for everyone. And I feel like when we were talking about doing this episode, one of the things that we were talking about doing it for was in memory of Connery. And like you said, like sometimes when you grow up with these people, it feels like you're losing a family member, because they've had such an impact in your life. And sometimes when that impact is met, depression can enter, and depression can really grow and fester, and suicide becomes a little bit more attractive. And so we just really want to encourage everyone that, much like the way that James Bond had gadgets in his Astro Martin that were awesome, that we have resources for you guys that are available that counteract and kind of, well, for lack of a better word, they slick and have smoke screens for depression and use oil and guns and make you feel better. We know that at least I know from losing someone very close to me, that it's loss is hard and grief is extraordinarily hard. And those resources that we put out are in the show notes wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode, but it's the heartbeat of why we make this. We just want you guys to know that you have value, and that no matter how bad today gets, tomorrow's always worth reaching for.
Yeah, I think the big thing we're talking about here is legacies, and we're honoring the Sean Connery's legacy that he left behind with James Bond and all the other iconic roles that he played, whether it be Hunt for Red October or Indiana Jones, his dad. So it's about, we're honoring the legacy, and we want everyone to be able to have a legacy, honorable legacy to leave behind.
Yeah, and I mean, we may never ever hit the kind of legacy that Connery left behind, but the legacy that we leave behind affects our family and affects our friends and affects those that are in our lives, that people genuinely care about us. And suicide's never a reason to end that legacy. So please stay with us. And on that note, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Victims and Villains. But if you are still itching for more Sean Connery, where can people find that triple feature that you talked about so sweetly at the beginning of this episode?
So the You Have to Watch This podcast, Sean Connery triple feature, will be dropping this Wednesday, the 4th. You can find that on any major podcasting platform under You Have to Watch This podcast. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at You Have to Watch This podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at ACRAMM4815. And Yeah.
Well, by the time this drops, all you guys got to do is wait one more day and you guys can check out that sweet triple feature. You guys can follow me on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, but most importantly, you guys can find us everywhere at Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd, and you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can not only find past episodes, our spin-off podcast, the Cage Corner podcast, all of our social media, but also the suicide prevention resources as well. And all of that is going to be in the show notes for wherever you guys are currently listening to this.
Until next time, keep talking nerd and hope and speaking nothing else. Stay golden.